Hi everyone, welcome to the Raspberry Pi project. So I had this idea for a project a few weeks ago and thought it would be really fun if during the Christmas holidays we all learnt a little bit about programming and making our own computer games. And what you've all received is a little pack in the post which contains some bits and pieces that can hopefully get you started, and we can start using those things to build our own computer game. I know, super exciting, right? Cool. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to switch over and show you some bits that I've got laid out on my desk, and hopefully you should have all of the same things, and we can talk about each of those bits in turn, and then and then we can go over what would be needed before you can actually get started. So I'm just going to switch view. Cool. So what I've got here on my desk is I've got a few bits. So here I have a keyboard. I'm sure you're all familiar with what one of those are. Here I have a mouse. This has on the end of it a USB-A port, and this is a cable that you will have received. This is a HDMI cable that you'll be plugging into the Raspberry Pi and also to the monitor. This is a micro SD card. Apologies for the poor focus here. So this is a micro SD card that contains the operating system that runs on the Raspberry Pi. This is a power supply. You're going to need this to plug your Raspberry Pi into the wall. These two things, these are parts of my case for my Raspberry Pi, but your case will look ever so slightly different to these. And this is the Raspberry Pi itself. So it looks super scary, but in essence this is what you see inside every computer there is. So inside your mummies and daddies phones will be something exactly like this, where there are a few components. So here is here is a CPU. This is what does the majority of the work on a computer, and these things are various modules, so these hold things like memory and things like that. Most of this not important for today, so I'm just going to talk over the ports on the Raspberry Pi. So if we're looking at it from this side, you'll see 5 ports. So this one is an Ethernet port. This is used for giving your Raspberry Pi internet, but we're all going to use Wi-Fi for this course. These are USB ports. These are USB 2 ports. These are USB 3 ports. You'll know the difference because the USB 3 ports have a blue piece, but they're all the same size and shape. So you can put any USB A connector into any of these ports. The USB 3 ports are faster than the USB 2 ports. And turning it over onto its side, we see a few other connections. So this is a barrel jack connector. We're not going to be using that in this course. This is a barrel jack connector. These two connectors are mini HDMI connectors. So you're going to use these connectors for outputting to a screen. So we're going to hopefully your parents have a spare monitor that you can plug these into, or a TV, that would be fine. So you'll plug in one end of the HDMI cable into there, and the other end will go into your TV or monitor. And the last one here is we have a USB-C power connector. So in here you'll be putting your power supply connection into there. Going around to this back end, you can see there's something here. This is where the micro SD card, this is where that will plug in around the back. And then just a couple of other things on the top. So one of the things that makes the Raspberry Pi really cool, which we're not going to necessarily get into in this course, but it's something we can definitely touch on in the future. See these pins at the back here? These are called GPIO pins, and these can be used to control other electronic things. So things like lights, switches, motors. If you wanted to build your own robot, you could do it with this Raspberry Pi. This can be the brains of your robot, and you could control your robot using some circuits that you build on these for another day. Yeah, I think that's all I wanted to show you on top of the Raspberry Pi. So what we're going to do is we are going to connect it all up and then start installing everything. So okay, hopefully this is something that you'll be able to see. Yeah, okay, cool. So we have the Raspberry Pi here, and what I'm going to do, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to turn over this Raspberry Pi and take this micro SD card that I have. I'm going to put this micro SD card in the Raspberry Pi just like that. Make sense? Cool. So the Raspberry Pi now has the SD card. What I'm now going to do is put the case on the Raspberry Pi. So in my case, that's yours will be ever so slightly different to this, but this is how I'm going to do mine. So I have my case, and I put one side on each, one bit on each side, and then I have to screw these in. I think your one just clips together, so I wouldn't worry too much about what I'm doing here. Okay, hopefully it doesn't take too long, and maybe I'll forward this if I edit the video. Okay, so the Raspberry Pi case is now on. So I told you that we were going to connect up a few things. So the first thing I'm going to connect is this mouse. So one end of the mouse is this bit, the other end of the mouse is this USB-A cable. I'm going to plug it into one of these USB ports on the end here. You'll notice this can go in only one way. If you can't get it in, turn it over and put it in. Okay. The next bit I'm going to plug in is this keyboard, and that one again has another USB cable, and I'm going to plug it into this USB-A port again. So plug it in there, and the other side into the keyboard. Okay, the next bits that I mentioned on this side, we have the USB power and HDMI. So I'm going to first plug in the USB power. So that's this cable here, USB power, plug it in. And the other one was the mini HDMI cable. So there's two different ends on this cable. There is a mini HDMI end and there's a full-size HDMI end. One small, one's big. Plug the small one into the Raspberry Pi, sorry for the focus. Plug the small one into the Raspberry Pi and the big one into your either monitor or TV. So I'm going to do that now. And again, this only goes one way round, so if you don't try and force it, one way is easy, the other way doesn't go in. Yeah? Okay. Okay, and the other side plugs into your monitor, which I'm going to plug in now. Okay, and that's all we need to see on the Raspberry Pi. So hopefully everything's all connected together. I actually need to plug mine into the wall, so I will just switch out and do that very briefly. Give me 2 secs. I should have prepared this earlier. Alright, so once it's all plugged in, my hope is this all works and we can just see what this looks like. So this is just what happens first time you run this Raspberry Pi. Hopefully we shouldn't get any problems starting it up. If we do, then definitely reach out and we can see if we can get you all sorted before we get started building the game. Otherwise, we're all going to be at different points. So I think this is just going to take a while on the first time we boot up. I'm going to go and get a cup of tea and I'll see you guys in a minute. Alright, after making a cup of coffee, looks like we are ready to get started. So hopefully you should see a welcome message like this. You're just going to click next through a few things. So if we click next here, I'm going to just change the time zone to be London because we're nearer London. And I'm going to click next. And I'm going to leave the password empty because I don't want one on here. And you should be able to set up the screen. So what it's asking now is to make sure that the screen that we're seeing is full. So if the taskbar, this thing at the top here, which has the Raspberry Pi logo and a few other bits, if that's not fitting on the screen, click this button and try and make sure it does. But if it's all there, just click next. And then you're going to want to join the Wi-Fi network in your house. So your parents might need to help you with this bit. So in my case, I'm going to join this network. And this will be whichever network you have at home. So I'm going to join this one and my password. Okay, so that will connect to your wireless network when you've entered the correct password. Might just take a moment. And the next bit, it's asking you if you want to update the software. This might take a while, so what I would suggest is just say next and click through it. But then I don't know, go and make a snack, go and watch a TV program or something. This might take a while. So if you just click next, I think it takes about 30 minutes. I don't know, don't quote me on that. So just let it do all of the updates that it needs to do, and then just come back once it's done. Okay, so now our updates have finished installing, and what we're going to want to do now is we're going to want to install some software on this Raspberry Pi. So before we do that, let me just give you a little tour of Raspberry Pi OS. So we have a few things. This is the taskbar, the thing that you're seeing at the top here. This is where you'll do things like launch various applications, and you'll be able to see what's going on. If we start on the right hand corner, you can see today's date and time. This is for controlling your volume. This is for your network, whether or not you're connected to Wi-Fi or not. If any of you are going to use Bluetooth mice and keyboards, maybe you might need your parents' help setting those up, but you would do it in here, and you would add devices so that you can add a Bluetooth mouse or a Bluetooth keyboard. I'm using wired ones, it's much easier. Now on this side of the taskbar you have a few icons. So this is the terminal. This might look a little scary, so don't get scared. If I click it, this is what sits behind Raspberry Pi OS and helps you do various things. We're not going to be using that, but it's there if you need to use it. Then there is a file manager, and this helps you find all of your files on the Raspberry Pi. So if any of you have ever used Windows or Mac OS, you'll have seen something similar to this. And here you have a web browser. I'm sure you all know what one of those are. So if you open up one of those, you can do various things like what is the time? And these are just going to search. It's going to use a search engine called DuckDuckGo. You can change that if you want, but I wouldn't if I were you. And you can just browse around just like you do with any internet thing. So you type in the address bar and you hit enter when you want to search anything, back, forward, refresh. Hopefully very straightforward. Now here you have the Raspberry Pi application menu. So if we click on that, we can see there's a few different things here. There's programming. We're not going to use those ones in particular, but these are various different things to do programming with. There's internet, which opens up the web browser that we just saw. There's sound and video, so if you want to watch any videos or anything like that, you do it in there. There's graphics, so the only thing installed at the moment is an image viewer. And then there's some accessories, so things like a calculator and an editor for text and things like that are already installed in here. But what we are going to do is we are going to go to preferences and we are going to look at recommended software for the Raspberry Pi. So let's all click on that, and there's a few things we're going to install. So once this is opened up, the first thing I want you to all install is, if we go to programming and then look for Scratch 3, just click the check mark there, and then also I like Visual Studio Code. We're probably not going to use it in this project, but I think it's a very useful thing to have, so I'm going to install that. And also, what would be the fun of having a computer without any games on it? So I'm going to also install this Code the Classics set of games that are pre-installed here, and hit apply. So now what this is going to do is it's going to download and install Scratch, Code the Classics, and Visual Studio Code. So this might again take a few minutes, and while this is doing it, yeah, maybe go and have, like, I don't know, a glass of milk, chocolate bar, whatever. I'll see you guys in a minute. Okay, so it looks like our software has been installed. So we're just going to click OK, and then we'll have a little look at all of the bits that we've just installed. So we can probably hit the X button at the top here, so we don't need that anymore. And now if we go back into our Raspberry Pi menu, we'll see we've got a few more things. So in programming now, we've also got Scratch 3, we've got Visual Studio Code, and under games we've got a few different ones. So we've got Boing, Bunner, Cavern, Myriapod, and Soccer. Now some of your parents may remember like original-ish versions of these sort of games. Like I think Bunner, if any of you guys remember this, looks very much like Frogger, where you're supposed to, I'm not very good at this, where you're supposed to try and do things like move up this thing without dying. Clearly, I'm not very good at that. But there's a few games that we've just downloaded, and you can have a little play with them. And the other two things we've got here are Visual Studio Code. So this is just a text editor where you can write and edit text. So if I just say File, New File, I can write, hello, this is my new text editor. So I spend maybe 50% of my life in Visual Studio Code, so this is something I use every day. but we're not necessarily going to need it. It's just here if we do need it. But the thing we're going to be spending all of our time in is Scratch 3. So just try and open that and see if it starts up as we want it to. It's cool. Scratch desktop is loading. So if we get to this point, we have everything we need for before we start our first session tomorrow. But what I'm going to do is just briefly show you around anyway, and there's a couple of tutorials and things like that you can do if you have the time or inclination to do so today. Otherwise, we can just come to that in the live session tomorrow. I think this is just taking a bit of time because it's the first time, so we're going to say no thanks, we don't want to share any information. So this is Scratch. I'm sure most of you have already seen bits of Scratch before, so you can do things like when I click on the flag, then move 50 steps. Cool. So every time I click on the flag, it moves 50 steps. Okay, relatively straightforward to do. There are some tutorials here. If you wanted to look at any of these, have a look at the Getting Started tutorial, which walks you through various things you can do. So it tells you to add a move block, so things like move 10 steps, say hello for 2 seconds after you've clicked it. So let's try that. So let's say hello for 2 seconds. So we'll add that. So if we move 10 steps and say hello for 2 seconds. So let's just move our cat back, move 2 steps, say hello for 2 seconds, and then it stops saying hello. So if you try and follow along some of these tutorials, they'll at least get you familiar with the basics of Scratch, and we will reconvene tomorrow and build our very own game, which is going to be awesome. Cool. All right, I will see you all tomorrow. Bye.